Welcome to today's episode of Speak Greasy. We're going to be talking all about food and travel today because we're hot on the heels of an article that came out in the FT.com which predicted that the Indian outbound tourism market is going to be the 5th largest in the world and the Indian domestic travel market is going to be the 3rd largest in the world. That is no mean statistic, and my guest today is in the right place at the right time, clearly. Salil Deshpande, who is the editor of Condé Nast Traveller India, and he's the one to go to for what's hot, what's new, and what's hidden. Welcome to the show, Salil.
Thank you. I've been following this podcast for a very long time, so it's
quite
a
great
pleasure
to have
actually
you
be
here.
here.
Yes.
Thank you.
That is a really amazing, I think, statistic that, we're hearing about across the board, that, the Indian tourism market is not to be ignored. And, what's your take on this?
Well, I would say this was inevitable, right? Just looking at where we are in terms of sheer numbers, there's so many of us, one, but also just the way India as an economy has progressed and evolved over the last 2 decades. This was inevitable. I think what's also important to note is that it's not just the sheer numbers, but also the way we are traveling has changed and is changing, and it's a reflection, or these stories are a reflection of the fact that the Indian traveler now is traveling more often, spending a lot more, but also traveling in a much, much more better way than they were earlier. So the world is taking us a lot more seriously, and they will take us a lot more seriously when they see us traveling more.
I completely agree with you. I think on my last few trips, international trips, I have definitely been amazed to see, very pleasantly surprised to see the number of Indians who are spending money on staying in really luxury hotels, experiencing the kind of restaurants that you don't normally see, Indians in, or you didn't until maybe 5 years ago. And there's definitely a growing awareness of, food, culture, lifestyle that Indians today want to indulge in, and I think that even as a Indian traveler, I've seen Western, Eastern, everywhere take the Indian traveler more seriously because of that spending power, and not as a sort of just a window shopper anymore. And I think that that's a huge endorsement. And we were talking about this earlier as well, that I think it also stems from where India is today on the global map, not just from a travel perspective, but what's happening in business, what's happening, even Indians who are making a mark, overseas in global positions, CEOs, etc. There's a lot of eyeballs on India, and you can't ignore that, and you can't help but feel a sense of pride, right? That when you travel. I want to just sort of go back a few years to when COVID happened, what we saw from an F&B perspective, and you're sitting here today in Magazine Street Kitchen, where we host chefs from all over the world, and right up until COVID, it was pretty much only international chefs, because that's what we thought was what the Indian consumer wanted to experience without leaving the city. And then obviously all that changed during COVID, and we started looking more in our own backyard and discovering all this regional food, and discovering our own country in a way, right? And while initially it happened out of force because we couldn't have people travel into India, it's now something that we choose to do, and we're doing more frequently. We're discovering so much more. And the consumer in parallel is also enjoying this and very happy and, craving more and more of these kind of experiences. I'm sure you saw that sort of happen even from a travel perspective, right? Where people were traveling around India more. And, is that something that's changed sort of, 4 years down the line? Are we now back to sort of craving that overseas travel, or has it sort of stayed? And is India kind of keeping up with this demand for wanting to discover our own country?
I think a couple of things have happened. So one is, of course, that we still want to go out and explore the world, and that's not changing. It's not going to change anytime soon. It's not going to change in the future at all. We will still want to go out and find every single experience that's worth talking about anywhere in the world. What has changed is I think somewhere our motivations for travel, the reason why we actually seek some of these experiences and some of these destinations. And I think somewhere it has to do with our sense of identity. Indians today, or the Indian traveler today, I feel, is not seeking validation from the outside. We are very confident about our place in the world where we are today, and I think it's showing in the way we travel, the way we arrive at a hotel or a destination, and the way we experience something. We were known to be demanding, but in a very different way earlier. Today, when we are demanding, it's because we are used to better service, for instance, at home, right? We're used to being treated in a certain way. We also know that we can demand that service because we're used to spending and we are comfortable spending in a certain way. So our standards are now higher, our expectations are higher, but we're also now better traveled, and therefore we are mindful of how we need to be in when we are traveling.
Tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing about experiential travel around India. Is it? It used to be. I remember like hotels having cooking classes about the local cuisine. Today, it's gone way beyond the walls of your hotel. There may not even be a hotel where you're going.
Absolutely.
What are you seeing on that front?
I mean, it's an exciting time and space for anyone who's creating experiences, right? And the appetite is definitely there. There is a need and there's a demand for these kind of experiences as well, where you're time poor and you only have a weekend, and therefore you'll sign up for a cooking class, maybe not at a hotel, but at the home of the chef from that particular property, right? So you'll have that, but you'll also have people who will spend 9 days cooped up in one little spot just to make sure that they get the right sighting of that one particular bird, right? And we're seeing all kinds of experiences coming through, whether it's food, whether it's wildlife, whether it's heritage. There are people who are willing to invest money, but also time, and I think that's a very, very important factor, especially for Asians in particular, where we spend a lot more just in terms of, or rather we value our experiences in terms of time and not just money. And we're seeing people willing to invest the time to actually go out and experience our own culture the way we had not earlier. And so there's an explosion of opportunities, whether it is, again, as I said, wildlife or conservation and food, heritage of in all forms, right? Textiles, for instance. And there are people who are willing to go out and learn some of these things, and that's a big factor. And for that, I think very important, and for that, they're willing to forsake what was conventionally known as luxury, right?
So, coming to this point about luxury, I feel like, I've always associated traveler with the luxury sort of segment. The magazine has changed its tagline from being the last word in travel to the world made local. Is that a reflection of a shift in approach to how we're traveling today?
Yes and no. I mean, when it comes to the tagline, it's still the ethos of what Condé Nast Traveller always was, right? It was always about giving you a very local, very insider perspectives on people, places, experiences, right? We've just distilled that to make it more meaningful and relevant to the times. We all want to travel around the world, but we also want to experience it the way locals would, right? And that's the philosophy, is that traveler gives you the insider track. It is about also being mindful of the fact that while travel changes us in many ways, it also changes the people and the local economies. So we are mindful of the fact that there is an impact that we have on local communities, local ecosystems, and therefore some of these experiences need to be spoken of by the locals themselves, so that they're being represented accurately, they are being represented sensitively, and they are being represented, of course, in the way that's most enjoyable.
How do you identify these local experiences?
Oh, I mean, I wish I could say it was easy, but I think what we do have over the years is we've developed this really good network of writers and contributors around the world. And that really is the gift, frankly, that keeps on giving. But we also listen a lot. I think the big part is of anything, I think, in the media business, it's not about what you're saying, it's about what you're listening to and who you're listening to. So I think the thing that we do very, very correctly and the thing that we do best is that we listen a lot. So we've got our feelers out everywhere. So even when I'm here, and before this I was picking up some points from you, and we're always listening. So whether it's a writer, a photographer, or just a designer, or someone, literally it could be a cab driver, you're always listening. And I think that's part of the secret sauce, right? And that's part of the recipe in that sense. The other thing also, I think today what's changed is that unlike say 20 years ago, your reader is a lot better traveled than they were earlier. And I'd be the first one to admit that, right? I've seen Traveller over the last 10 odd years over here. And your readers also know a lot more, if not everything. You can't expect them to be out there every
And they have
day.
access to the internet, which
and they have
disseminates.
access to the internet. And they have their own WhatsApp groups where everyone's posting pictures and stuff like that. So there are multiple sources of information and inspiration.
I know
That's where the
WhatsApp
magic
groups
happens.
go berserk, especially around holiday times when everyone's asking for lists of places, and it's interesting. The lists are always around food. Like that is what people today are. I feel planning ahead of time, like more than amusement parks and whatever day trips they would do, or it's really food has just become, and I'm very grateful for that because that's it's a validation of the business that we're in, and that people now, it's great that people are traveling for food. You're absolutely right. This idea of being better informed, I think, especially from our personal experience of creating the kind of menu we did at the table, where a lot of people weren't familiar with this ingredient-driven food like 14 years ago, right? So the fact that they're well-traveled or better traveled helps us as well, because you're not in that education phase anymore. You're actually able to do what you want to do and people can enjoy that.
There's so many restaurants and bars, and there's one popping up literally
Exactly.
every
I mean, just
single
in Bombay.
day. In Bombay.
So how do you keep up and how do you filter what's happening? With when people look at you as a go-to for recommendations and it's a filter, how do you do that process when there's something opening literally every day in just this city? Forget the rest of the country.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough job, but someone has to do it. So which is why we're grateful again for our writers, and I'm sure they're grateful for us to send them out. But I think one is that, of course, we try everything out, right? So that's one. Most importantly is that everything that you see and read on Traveller is something that someone has actually tried out. What we also do when we look at restaurants is that because we have, by virtue of having first access and by being there, we are in a slightly unique position where we have the inside track again, right? And I see our role or the role of the writers in Condé Nast Traveller is where we are trying to inform the reader or the diner about the story behind a certain cuisine or a concept or a menu, right? Which is not what they may always be able to get when they are actually dining, right? So our point is not to pass judgment on that particular place, because often when you're in a pre-opening phase, you know this better than anyone else, is that it takes time for a concept or a restaurant to settle down, for people to adopt and understand what they're trying to do and all of those things. What we're trying to fill the gap, what we're trying to do is fill the gap between what the chef intends and what they're actually delivering. Because it's not like the chef is going to be there at every single table, at every single service, and be able to explain every single thing that they're trying to produce. So the idea is that if you're reading a story on CNT, you will be able to appreciate that place or that experience a lot better than if you weren't otherwise.
Or if you just showed up.
And you go and try it out, and then you make your own judgment.
But coming back to this idea of people traveling for food, and it's not just this bucket list of restaurants, but even, I recently was talking to, I'm sure Anubhuti, who lives in Delhi but does these travel experiences around Lucknow. And, because I wanted someone local to show me around and go beyond kebabs and, whatever that people
Right.
think Lucknow food is all about, biryani and kebabs. And, so it's really about planning a trip around experiencing that food. Is that something that you're seeing readers sort of search for more online? And, so is that something that you're seeing shift over the 10 plus years that you've been at?
Oh,
Condé Nast?
100%. I think we were always, I think all of us in general as travelers were curious about food, but it's now gone to another level altogether, right? So it's almost like,
But what's triggered this?
I mean, I could say there was one particular factor, but I think somewhere the fact that food in many ways is your easiest or your first entry point into a culture, right? In many ways, even before you went to Japan, you've probably had your first experience of a Japanese meal, right? In some form, somewhere or the other. So, and I think that's a good hook somewhere. And food is, of course, so much about emotion and what it makes you feel when you're having it. And I think that is what builds in a certain hook. I think that's the one big factor. And the second is, of course, you've got Instagram and you've got YouTube and you've got WhatsApp groups where everyone's posting pictures of food. It's also the easiest thing to click and share, right? As opposed to yet another picture of, say Machu Picchu or wherever it is that you are, right? And it also, I think, cues in some way, unlike the same experience, which could be a Colosseum, which could be the Taj, could be the Machu Picchu. Food is again somewhere about, is a way to signal your own taste and your curation. Right, you and I could go to Bangkok and end up in very different places, right? So I think subliminally people are also using, and I mean subliminally, people are also using food to signal their own identity, their own taste, their own personality, right? And that is why I think food travels a lot farther on the internet than anything else.
That's very interesting. I never thought of it that way, but you're right that you are, like you said, like subconsciously communicating your tastes, your spending ability, your, all of that, your interest in, in culture.
Absolutely.
More than just doing the sort of what was earlier the bucket list, right? Today it feels like food is the bucket list, and not just the historical monuments.
Absolutely,
and
you'll find a lot of people in food or people who take their food seriously will consciously, in some cases, tailor their trips in a way that they will not do the bucket listy things. They will not do the top 5, the must-haves, the must-dos, because it's almost like saying that, you know what I mean? If you know, you know, right?
Yeah.
It's almost about trying to go slightly off center and finding these offbeat experiences and cultures and cuisines and all of those things. So I think food is a and that's, I think, that's been one of the inflection points. The second is, of course, you've had so much of global cuisine come into India, right? Over the last 5, 7, 10 years. Various reasons, people are spending a lot more. In a city like Bombay, where the homes are smaller, meeting and entertaining largely happens outside. So then that food becomes a focal point around where conversations happen, deals happen, celebrations happen. And therefore, I think foods really had a moment, I think somewhere over the last 7 to 8 years. Unfortunately, COVID sort of put a gap, but I think now we're out there with vengeance.
what do you see happening over the next 5 years? Like, what is it looking like? Like, how is this going to evolve? I mean, today we know we're asking people recommendations, we're seeking, locals to show us around and things. What's this going to look like?
I think it's only going to get bigger and better and more interesting, and I think more exciting, and which is where I'm very curious to see what, restaurateurs and chefs create. We've seen what they're up to right now, and we're looking at, we're in 2024, but somewhere the idea of dining is going to very quickly, I mean, it's already there, right? At this point of time, dining is no longer just about having a meal. It's not about filling your tummy or just going out and having a conversation. It's really about an experience. It's an adventure. People plan 6 months ahead for that one particular experience. Sometimes it's not even about the food. It's not about the taste. It's not about the flavor. It's about the drama, right? You look at what Gagan is doing, not to say that the food does not taste good, but there is so much theater around that, and people have points of view on that. But I think that's where you will see that's going to be one end of the spectrum. And at the other end, you will find people traveling for a slightly more immersive experience, right? Which is where they want to go and pick their own food. They want to go and pluck their own vegetables. They want to sometimes, depending on how much time they have, they may even want to spend time growing that particular food. And I'm not saying these are two different people. It could be the same person at two different points in time, at two different points on the calendar, or two different points in their life journey. The person who will book a trip to Thailand or wherever it is 6 months ahead for that one Michelin star experience will perhaps 5 years down the line say that I'm going to take 3 months out to go and live on a farm and grow my own vegetables and see if this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life. Right? I think the one mistake that we tend to make is that we bucket people as different people, and traveler A will do this and traveler B will do this and traveler C will work in a different way. I think in many ways we are the same people at different points in time with different motivations and different inspirations. And we will see, I think what we are already seeing is that this entire bouquet of experiences will only get more colorful. And depending on who you are and what you're seeking at whatever point of time, you will find a culinary experience somewhere in the world that will speak to you in the most unique way.
So are there any destinations that you have come across that you think are the next sort of place that everyone's going to kind of flock to?
I wouldn't want to call them out for obvious reasons. At this point of time, you'll find them in the next issue of Condé Nast Traveller. But I'll tell you which ones that I'm particularly sort of curious about, if not excited about. I haven't been to Madurai yet for the food. So I've heard so much about the food in Madurai. That's from India. I think that's one on my list. The one that I would pick internationally is, I would say, Iran.
Okay, but that's really tough to get to.
It's tough
right
to get
now.
to, which is why it's so exotic in many ways. That it's unfortunately untapped in that sense. It's also the source of so much of goodness, right, and richness in our cuisine. I don't know when I'm going to get there, but it's on the bucket list.
I love my kubide and like all of that, the chelo kebab, and it's really that's probably like a sliver of what they eat locally, but that is one of my favorite cuisines as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think I would say maybe Ethiopia. Perhaps.
I had my first Ethiopian meal in LA. There's like a whole neighborhood that has Ethiopian restaurants. And it's actually very similar to Indian food. With the, I don't know all now the names, but it's like a dosa kind of thing. And then you have like what's like a dal and almost sort of, and very like nutritious. But yeah, that was a discovery for me. Coming back to this idea of culinary tourism, I think a lot has to do with what how the industry is supported, right? And how even like tourism authorities or the government or whoever sees the value of food in bringing tourism in. What do you, from your perspective, wish for, for the tourism authorities to kind of see so that India really is a year-round destination?
I think... look, the basics are there, right? We've got such a great culinary culture and diversity, both.
Exactly.
That you can possibly never have every good meal that there is to have in India in a lifetime, right? Practically speaking. Even within Bombay, there's so many. Even within Maharashtra, what we pass off as Maharashtrian cuisine is literally about 1/5 perhaps, and that's being generous. It's probably about 1/5 of what Maharashtra itself as a state has to offer, and I'm not even getting into the rest of the country. So I think the good news is that the basics are there. I think what the authorities need to do, perhaps, my suggestion would be is for them to really acknowledge and accept the fact that there is such great potential for culinary tourism within the country, and then just give the local industry and the local entrepreneurs the resources and the space, and then get out of the way, right? We've seen that despite all constraints, we've seen what certain cities and certain towns have done, and despite everything
You mean
else.
like internationally?
Just internationally, but also
Where would you like? Where do you consider a city that's really kind of figured that out?
I'll tell you what I think is the most interesting example. Interesting example would perhaps would be Dubai, right? Built out of nothing, frankly, and this is something that we've seen evolve over literally over the last 2 decades, and look at where it is today, right? Just in terms of a culinary destination, despite all the constraints, what they've managed to achieve, and the way they've managed to bring in the diversity, the flavor, and the richness, and you've got everything from street to fine dining at this point of time. So I think it's the least obvious example, but I think it's the most interesting example to say that when you have nothing, you can build something which is actually quite exciting. Right? And then when you have the gift of what we have over here in India, I think it's just a matter of time and a little bit of vision and a little bit of confidence again to believe that our cuisine is so rich, is so powerful, and has such great stories to tell. People came all the way from across the world to come for our pepper and for our spices, and they built entire empires out of that. So just imagine what we can achieve when we all put that together in a pot.
I think, one thing that I would love to see happen more of is like food festivals, right? Because I think that's something that people actually, when they're in other cities, will go and experience. It's a great way of getting a sort of, snapshot of, or being able to experience more things in a shorter time. And, it's a great way of bringing communities together as well, like the food communities together. Again, I don't think that's something, I think it happens sort of very sporadically here,
correct.
and on a very sort of very hyper localized way, or sort of in a very micro community way. It's not something that's become mass, and I don't mean that in a bad way. But that's something I think would really kind of start.
100%. I think that's something that's vastly untapped. The idea of a really one big food festival has not come through yet, right?
Yeah.
And you're right. There's absolutely nothing at this point of time, which means that there is great potential for us to come up with a concept across the country, in many different parts of the country, where you create food festivals for people to come together and sample cuisines and cultures that they've not done otherwise. The other opportunity is again literally food and festivals, right? Just look at the range of. Just look at a festival calendar, right? There is
like actual
literally,
religious festivals,
absolutely, religious festivals and like social festivals in many different ways. You've got something happening every second week in some part of the country, right? Whether it's you kick off the year with a Makar Sankranti where you have sesame and til laddus and everything else, to to Christmas right at the end and everything else, and there's so much diversity. But imagine putting out a spread for Diwali. Imagine putting out a vast, never-ending table for Eid. Imagine putting something together to celebrate Sadhya and all of those things. Yeah. So that itself, and that's just talking pure commerce.
Why is nobody doing this? Like, this just seems like low-hanging fruit.
Absolutely, right? Yeah. Absolutely. Just imagine like the vast, like a never-ending table. It's, I think, two things. One is, of course, the concepts. First is the infrastructure, right? And the second is, of course, once you've got the infrastructure in place, the storytelling. The belief that our food has the potential to move people, literally, but also figuratively. And it has the power and potential to bring people into the country and for them to then experience a country and a culture in the most powerful way. I think once we believe in that collectively, and the people in positions of power believe that, things will change.
I think that's where hopefully storytelling through
100%.
Traveller will happen. But it's so true about this idea of storytelling, because when we had that Pathari Prabhu meal, I learned so much about the socio-economic culture of that community, in terms of how they were affluent, and that there was so the ingredients that were used, or that it's a very non-veg heavy sort of cuisine, I would say, and just that it's not all like, even though it's Maharashtrian, it's not all about like coconut and in everything, which you do see in a lot of other coastal cuisine. So I think there's so much that and also the fact that they were like they were an immigrant community, as far as I understand. I mean, obviously several centuries ago, but then how that's kind of influenced the cuisine that we have today, right? So there's so much that you learn about, through food, that it just feels like this is something that just needs to be, documented and shared with a larger audience. I mean,
Absolutely, and I think some of our chefs are doing that. Home chefs, but also the ones who are running some of our best restaurants today are doing that. They're going out there with a genuine sense of curiosity, with an appetite to learn, and they are plating some of those meals in a very interesting way. And people have points of view on that. This is not how we eat at home, and this is not my local cuisine. But that's not the point of this entire exercise, right? The point is that they're going out there and representing ingredients and produce and techniques and flavors that were otherwise alien to you, even when they were really only about 100 kilometers from you.
Exactly.
Right? And I think that is a very interesting trend. That's actually, I won't even call it a trend. I think that's a shift that's happened, and I'm very happy to actually see that and hope that comes through, because that's how communities and cultures and food that's never been represented will find space at our tables. Northeast Indian cuisine, right? For instance, if I were to ask anyone at this point of time, when you say Indian cuisine, what comes to your mind, right? Or when you say Indian ingredients, what comes to your mind? You'll say curry leaf, aloo, all of those things. Will someone say bamboo shoot?
No. Yeah.
Right? It's not.
Or pork. They eat so much pork.
Absolutely.
Right? Like, it's not
But this is Indian cuisine.
Yeah.
Right? It's just that it's not found a seat at
mainstream.
Most tables, right, in the country today, and that's changing. That's changing in fits and spurts in certain parts of the country. But only when that cuisine gets some shelf space, gets some spotlight and some attention, and gets that storytelling, is when people will start experimenting. When they'll come in for a pop-up, they'll come in for a meal, they'll come in for an experience. They may or may not like it. Not everyone may enjoy it, but at least they will be curious about it, and I think the barriers will come down, and that's how.
Do you feel like that's something that you all have a kind of responsibility or an inclination to do in a way?
Yeah, I mean, I won't call it responsibility, but definitely a sense of purpose, and I think that's something that we actively seek out when we're looking for stories, whether it's for the magazine or for the website, or even if it's something for social media. Is that we're looking at spotlighting and platforming people, projects, cultures that otherwise do not get the attention, that otherwise may not get that kind of space, right? And we've seen some wonderful things actually happen. And just a couple of months ago, we had a story on this really interesting initiative in Arunachal Pradesh. It's, I think, called Damu's Heritage House, which is where a bunch of women from the local tribe came together. I think about 10 women came together to create a dining experience in a local village home, right? And their story was that as the roads came in and things changed and the shops came into our villages and everything else, we started eating different things over time. And our own cuisine and our own sort of flavors are getting lost. And so how do we preserve that? And one way to preserve that is to give it some sort of commercial sustenance, right? And which is why they've taken up this old village home, which is also partly a story about sustaining heritage and architecture. And now in that local village home, they are plating a very interesting dining experience, and it's backed by the United Nations in some form. And it's a very interesting project and initiative. And I think stories like those are important for us to tell. It's important to spread the word about some of these initiatives, which is why we consciously go out and seek these stories and make sure that they get the attention that they deserve.
Speaking of the traveler changing in terms of the Indian traveler, okay, I know we've got this notorious reputation of being like thepla carrying, vegetarians that, either can't eat in a lot of countries because they're very non-veg centric cuisines, or maybe we weren't as experimental with, trying the local food, and we wanted our nasta and is that something you're seeing change? Is that reputation changing?
Well, I don't know about reputation, but I feel like this might be an unpopular opinion, but I think it's completely okay to carry your teplas wherever you go.
Amazing.
Right?
Why is that? Why
I think
do you
it's
say
great
that?
because, so here's the thing, right? And I do have a strong point of view on people who look down upon others who carry their comfort food when they go. Okay, as much as we romanticize the idea of traveling for food and everything else, which is great for a certain set of travelers on most days, we also have to acknowledge the fact that not all of us travel the same way and for the same reason, and not all of us come from the same context. We often travel in groups together, multi-generational groups. Parents have come from a different sort of context in terms of time, place. Sometimes your comfort food is a way for you to go beyond your own boundaries and help you, and that's what actually helps you go into places, literally places and territories which you otherwise would not be able to explore. Let's just take India, for instance, right? The Northeast, for various reasons, has been underexplored by the rest of the country. And that's partly because a lot of people have certain notions about what Northeast Indian cuisine is, or whether or not they will be able to get the kind of food that they will enjoy or be comfortable with. But if I were to tell people that do not worry, you will get your, whatever it is that you eat at home, your dal, chawal, roti, sabzi, rice, everything else over there, please go and enjoy.
Right.
You will see a lot more people being willing to take that risk. And when they actually go there, they will find that, hey, what the guy is having at the table next door is something that I might just enjoy. And that is one way to actually break the barriers. So I feel like comfort food actually helps people explore different parts of the world a lot more better, a lot more confidently. And to that extent, I would say that teplas have perhaps helped people travel better than some of the most glossiest of tourist brochures. So I'm absolutely all for anyone who wants to travel with teplas.
I've absolutely never thought of it from that perspective, but you're right that food can sometimes be a barrier to travel. It's not always the incentive and the attraction to travel, and that's kind of
Absolutely. I mean, ask the guy who's going to Antwerp 10 times a year, and they'll tell you it's probably the Sarvana Bhavan or something else that they really enjoy, and nothing wrong with that.
There's an
right?
opportunity for a lot of Indians to open restaurants in places that you wouldn't generally find. Maybe a lot of vegetarian food. I know Spain, people have a lot of trouble with vegetarian food, and but I'm sure there's lots of places, and there's a huge opportunity there for Indians. But also, I love the fact that you're seeing now Indian restaurants open all over the world. Chefs, really now make their mark. Indian chefs making their mark around the world, and it's not just with North Indian and South Indian food, but it's going way beyond that. That's amazing. Is that also something that piques the interest of your reader, in terms of how Indian food is now making a mark beyond India?
I think so. I mean, I wouldn't say to the extent that they're going out there and looking for these experiences, but I think to the point that you said earlier, is that it's making Indian food and Indian traveler a lot more visible, right? And it's sort of feeding into that sense of identity, and therefore you're getting a lot more confidence to travel. You get a lot more respect when you travel in some of these countries and in these cultures, but also from a culinary perspective, it's a great endorsement of what Indian chefs can do. It's not just about serving the most flavorful butter chicken anymore, right? It's about taking things to the next level. We saw what's happening with in the US. We're seeing in the UK and between Dishum and Dhamaka and all of these guys doing some really exciting stuff. The important thing, I think, is they're now speaking on their own terms, right? When you say that this is unapologetically spicy, we're not going to tone the spice levels down, right? They're making a statement, It's about saying that, we're not just here to serve. I mean, of course, we're here to serve you, but we'll serve you on our own terms. Come, eat our food, enjoy our food.
Yeah.
You may like it, you may not, but this is how we are. And I think that is the most exciting shift that's happening. And that feeds into how we feel when we go into these places and how we feel when we walk into a hotel. And I think that's just great news for all of us.
Any advice to restaurateurs on things from your perspective that I mean, no, but like it's a good thing, right? Like as in, it could be even just from a storytelling perspective, like get your story right, because I think that's what the consumer wants to know. I mean, anything that you sort of feel would help restaurateurs.
It's a tough one, to be honest, because I'm not quite sure if I'm in a position to advise. But what I definitely say is that from a storyteller's perspective, I think what we realize very much and we are fully aware of is that it's a tough business, right? It's a very, very tough business. It's unforgiving in many ways, especially in cities like Bombay where the rents are crazy and there's so much competition. So I think we are very mindful of the fact that it's a tough business. Social media does not make it easy, especially on the people side of things, where the chefs have to deal with so much attention at one end and not just criticism, because I think it's easier sometimes to deal with criticism because you can bat it out saying, people on the internet are crazy. But how do you deal with attention when everybody loves you, right? Because that's the drug, right? Really, that's the one that's difficult to negotiate sometimes. I think over a period of a year or 2 or 3, when you start getting used to that attention and that energy and that love, how do you deal with that? It's something that restaurateurs who manage these creative folk will also have to deal with. I think that's, again, it's not advice, but it's just something that I've seen. How do you take care of your people is supremely critical, because that's your product, right? It's not what you're actually, today that's your product. It's not what you're putting up on the table. So I think it's just something that all of us have to be mindful of, even as diners, right? When we call and ask for a table, when we leave feedback, when we leave comments, when we leave everything, I think collectively it's not just about restaurateurs, but anyone who's listening at this point of time. I think we just have to understand that everyone's doing it because they love it, right? Hospitality is not a business for people who are very, very rational. It's unreasonable hours, unreasonable demands on your time, energy, emotions. We all just have to be a little more forgiving of each other and ourselves, I think, at one point of time. And I think just go out there and experience, what you guys are creating. I think restaurateurs also need to understand that people are out there to have a good time, right? And therefore, when there is a gap in expectations, there's a gap in delivery in many cases, people are rightfully going to be disappointed. 10 years ago, or 15 years ago, they didn't have too many ways to express. Today they do. Today they have a point of view, they have an opinion, they have all of that. So I think be less combative. Just acknowledge the fact that everyone is in it because they all want to have a good time at both ends, right? So I think just some perspective at this point of time. But
enjoy it.
Enjoy the ride.
As much as we can.
Oh, yes.
You guys have the Top Restaurant Awards, which is back after, it was there last year. There was a short hiatus. It's, I think, on every restaurateur's calendar. Any inside scoop you want to share? Or
oh, my God.
Give us some dope, Salil.
Well, the dope is, the dope really is that there's no way that any one of us can actually guide the outcome of this. We've got 100 jury members from 10 regions of India. Everything, including the northeast of India, is represented. And it's the collective wisdom of these 100 jury members, which includes literally the best food writers in the country and people who actually go out and dine for the joy of it, right? So we have perspective from both ends. It's audited by one of the big 4 consulting firms. So the process is unimpeachable. So the dope really is that whether we like it or not, it is going to be, it always has been, and it'll continue to be something that's very objective. And I'd really be scared if we all agree on the top 50 list at some point of time, because something's gone terribly wrong somewhere, and then we are being very industrial, right?
Do you look forward to it, or do you kind of dread it because of all the pushback you might get?
I'll tell you, when we saw the list,
right?
when we saw the list last time, I was surprised, with a few things. And it's not always pleasant. Let's just say it's not always pleasant. But I think what helps us sleep better is that we know that the process is clean and that we've had nothing to do, no hanky-panky anywhere. So it's great. But I think what's important to remember is that it's a celebration. In all fairness, it's a celebration, and you've been there in that room every night. The mood is great. The energy is great. Everyone's just out there to celebrate, have a good time. The after party is great. It's all of that. So it's actually just good to see everyone having a good time, regardless of where they're on the list.
No, I mean, for sure, the fraternity definitely takes full advantage of a good party.
What I can tell you is that the Top Restaurant Awards are definitely, of course, are the biggest thing on the food calendar for us, perhaps even for the country. But it's not the only thing that we're going to be doing. There's a lot more that's coming up. By the time this episode's out, perhaps you'll see, you'll see some of that in action. But the focus for Condé Nast Traveller is, among many other things, is the food. But it's not just about where to eat. It's also about how to eat. It's about how to appreciate not just the food, but what goes behind the food, where it comes from. The culture, the effort that goes into plating that meal, the people the people who actually produce these meals. So it's not just about a restaurant review or a preview. It's really about the culture of dining and the culture of food, not just dining again. And if you follow us online, then you'll see that all of this will come in. So the idea is to actually just help people appreciate food in a much better way.
Amazing. Well, looking forward to all of that. Before I let you go, I'm going to ask you some quick destination names, India and overseas, wherever, that you that fit the criteria. So tell us about a place that really took you by surprise.
Gujarat. Stereotypes, right? You have somehow...
Vegetarian dry state is what comes.
Vegetarian dry state, one part of it is true. Well, almost entirely true. Not entirely, but... So Gujarat, just the range of... Just the diversity in terms of cuisine as you travel across the state is crazy, right? Everything from meat to fish to even within vegetarian, like the Kathiawadi food, like is the different parts of the state have different cuisines and different flavors, and I think that's the one state that actually took me by one region that took me by surprise.
Was not expecting that. So
absolutely.
A place that's high on your bucket list.
I would say Korea, South Korea, at this point of time. Very curious about the cuisine. We've, of course, sampled some of that in here, but to get the full blast of that entire thing as an experience, very high.
Somewhere you're dying to take your son to?
For the food, it could be anywhere, but just as a vacation spot, we had the absolutely most perfect holiday 3 years ago in Landor, in Uttarakhand, Missouri. Yeah, it was just perfect. The weather was great. It was off-season. We had a bit of snow, and it was perfect in every way. So if I were to go back, I think that's the one place I would go back to. But that's also the reason why I'm very scared of going back, because I had the most perfect experience. I'm not sure if it'll...
You want to... So it's set a high standard. Yeah. Anywhere that you haven't been to yet that you want to take him to?
Yes. An African safari.
Yeah. I'm dying to take our 11-year-old on a safari. I think now she's at the right age to sit on those 3-hour...
and wake up at
Jeep
like
ride.
4 a.m.
Exactly, and wake up and be quiet. Yeah, no, definitely. Favorite food destination?
Oh, many. I mean, I have, how shall I say, I'm fairly easy with that, right? So I would say within the country, I would say Delhi, Lucknow, Bombay, of course, because it's home and it's just so many memories in many ways. But I would say Delhi and Lucknow.
And overseas?
Overseas would be just for the power of again, just the memories. Italy, that's where we were on a honeymoon and so many experiences, so many things to actually go back for. So yeah, I would say that.
Where are you off to next?
Well, right now the Bahamas. But
Tough life, Salil.
Oh, no. But someone's got to do it, right? So there's that, but I'm looking forward to my trips to... Where am I going next? I've lost track, but these are mostly last minute. There's a Thailand trip on the cards. There is Rajasthan. There's Calcutta. I don't know which of these I'll finally end up at, but it's a bit of a scheduling situation. And yeah, I think that's where it is.
Yeah, I think now I pretty much look forward to going anywhere because of food. I think it's not even a thing of like, oh, it's going to a city or it's going somewhere remote or it's going international, or it's just it's exciting now just because of what could be discovered.
And Japan, I would say next year for Japan. Very interesting. So I'm going to take some tips, of course.
100%.
Would love that.
For once, you're taking tips from me.
Oh, no, always. As I said, we're always listening. Yeah. We're always listening. That's the secret sauce.
Listen, it's been such fun having you on the show, and thank you for being very candid and, sharing all your insights. And yeah, we're looking forward to what food and travel hold for all of us. So
thank you. You've been very kind, and it was really great to be on the show. And I hope everyone enjoyed listening.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.